Yeah.
get started.
Yeah.
We
You
go.
could tell us about how they met.
Here, I'm gonna
Well,
cut this.
my ancestors founded Sullivan County in the 1830s.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's right after Missouri opened up in the 1920s.
Oh yeah.
That's when it became a state.
Mm-hmm.
And so they moved to Missouri from Virginia. Now you got to understand, Virginia was a anything east of the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, west of the ocean,
Yeah.
because the states weren't. A lot of them weren't states until 21.
Mm-hmm.
2021, they all started becoming states.
Yeah.
So a lot of them were born in the Virginia territory.
Yeah.
And
And your family immigrated to Missouri.
they were, in the 1800s or 1830s.
That's early,
Yeah, well, they wanted to come west,
It's only a couple of years after the state was founded.
right? They were very aggressive, and they moved with the river, down the Ohio, from Lexington over to Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, my mother's family settled in western Missouri, western Grundy County, and some of the other parts of the county. And so what they settled there, they farmed and set all farming operations. My mother's family was Gustavus Scott, and they came with several slaves. I think they had about 30 slaves and about 100,000 in gold. And I've got records in books. You can dig this all out, but I'm doing this from memory.
Yeah.
And what they enjoyed doing was farming. And in the 1850s, the Scots and the Fulkersons and the Whittons owned slaves together. And so they were, as Christians, they would made a man and a woman together, and they lived so many years for one master, and then the family moved to another family and so many years there. And it was more like an indentured servant than actually slavery,
Yeah.
because they treated them as humans. And
They had pensions too. Remember
Yes.
we found that old will
mm-hmm.
with when Gustavus passed away, he gave pensions to his house servants.
Yes,
Oh, okay. That seems fairly progressive.
that was only $35 a month or something, but
Yeah.
it wasn't big money. But anyway, gave pensions to them. But when he did that, it was kind of interesting. The people from the north had came down to the he had a college in Edinburgh,
Mm-hmm.
and they occupied it for officers' headquarters. And he said he died of the rage, which means he had a stroke and passed away.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, he died of the rage. But anyway, they in the 1850s, they sent, I think 8 or 9 slaves back to Liberia, which is in the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
And there's an article, and I've got a copy of the newspaper. In 1911, one of the Whittons went back to Liberia to see how the descendants had done.
Mm-hmm.
And they came back with a report that they were very badly treated in Liberia.
Ooh.
Well, they've been sold by their enemies in Liberia to the French and the English.
Yeah.
And so they didn't do near as well as the slaves that stayed on the young ones wanted to go back. The old slaves stayed as tenant farmers. And what was kind of neat was they sharecropped and survived.
Yeah.
And the grave for the family, Scott family, is still there in Edinburgh.
Oh, really?
So it's kind of it's kind of really a memorial to not all treatment was bad. It's not all, you know.
Well, how did your parents meet?
Well, when my dad settled in Winters along the Medicine Creek, and my grandfather was wealthy. He had Grandpa Samuel James had electric lights. They were DC, but he had electric lights. And 3 of his children went down to St. Louis in 3 wagons. And they slept in one wagon, or brought a car back in the other wagon, and they hauled fuel in the 3rd wagon. And when they got to the farm on Osgood, what they did then was take and fill the car up, drove it to Osgood, run it all around town showing their car off.
Yeah.
Going back home, the old man pulled back on the steering wheel and said, "Whoa," and crashed it in the corral.
So you've been used to driving a carriage?
No, he's used to having a buggy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
The steering wheel didn't work like reins.
I was just wondering if I could get a, shirt.
Go.
Okay, Stephen.
Go. We're recording.
And what was funny was that everybody made fun of him, but he's the only one who's able to crash a car for early and all was
Only
good.
one with a car to crash.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, he owned the Farmer Exchange, and they went in Osgood, and that was like a Tractor Supply or a MFA or whatever it is
yeah.
today. And my dad would take a truck, and of course there was a 2-ton truck. I don't remember what it was, international. Most trucks in those days are international or Dodge Brothers, because that's the most popular trucks.
Yeah.
He'd drive to Kansas City, get a load of feed or grain or whatever they were, usually meal, because grain was
Yeah.
local. And he might take grain down and have it processed, and then they'd bring it home. Well, one night he was coming home and he broke down in front of my mother's house. Now, everybody knew everybody. And on Osgood was south on north on 139. But 139 went clear down into Arkansas,
Yeah.
winding down through the state. So he'd take it to 6 at Trenton and take 69 down to Kansas City.
Makes sense.
And so when he came back, he blew a tire that night. Well, nobody was put out in a truck at
You
night.
couldn't call AAA?
No AAA, I don't think.
Little predating it.
But anyway, my grandfather invited him in and put him on the couch downstairs. The girls, my grandfather, Boyle Fulkerson, had 6 girls, and so he was protective of them. But they were friends in those days. You didn't have perverts, at least not knowing about. And so that next morning, my mom got up and cooked him breakfast. And then the rest of that's kind of history.
She must have been a good cook then.
Yeah.
Well, she was. Actually, my mother was quite good.
And what was the age difference between them again?
He was born in 98, and she was born in 1918.
So 20 years.
20 years. He had
But-
been married before to a rancher girl,
Mm-hmm.
and she'd ran off with some salesman,
And left her baby behind, right? Her
left her
infant?
baby
Oh.
boy behind, which is my half brother. So my dad was doing his duty as a father,
That's
which
big.
tells you something about him.
Oh yeah.
And
Single dad in the, what, 30s, 20s? Right in the Depression, he was a single
Yeah.
dad.
Yeah,
yes.
that can't be a great position to be in.
Well, they did what they had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 36 or 38, he had a heart attack and was killed at junction of
Who
6.
was?
My grandfather.
Your Boyle?
No,
Or your dad's dad?
my dad's dad.
Okay.
So it was Daniel Marion. And Sarah went down the road and paid $15 for a Model A, sent bills of hay out in the field, and pretended like their streets in Osgood, and learned to drive at the age of 87.
Wow.
That's right when most people stop driving.
Yeah, that's when most people quit.
Yeah.
But
She must have been born during the Civil War then.
I've got the date over there, but she was quite spry. And if knowing Aunt Beulah was the same, short little wiry gal, feisty and.
Didn't Aunt Beulah, wasn't she the one who renewed her license when she was 100? Or close to it?
Well, what she did was, she had a probably 72, 73 Buick, the Sabre, and she had two sisters that lived in Aurora, Illinois. They taught school along the Charles River, Fox River, really. And so she decided she'd go visit her daughters. Got in the car and took off. Went to Chicago. Had a flat tire around Grinnell, Iowa. So what do? You call your son Larry and tell me come fix the tire.
But how old was he?
Larry was, well, Aunt Beulah had to be in her 90s and he was probably in his 80s. So, what was funny, Larry and,
So her son that she called to come help was a senior citizen himself.
yeah, Larry and his son, I forget what his son was. Gosh. Anyway,
And his son must have been in his 60s then.
well, he's probably in the 40s or late 50s anyway.
That is definitely something I would end up rubbernecking if I drove by it.
Anyway, they went
Senior
by.
citizens.
They went up there and he said, I'm going to go up and get Mom. I'm going to take her up to the daughters and I'm bringing the car back. So he brought her back. They took her to the daughters and then stayed a while. He brought her back. And then it was in the Gazette, Phoenix Gazette or whatever magazine it was, newspaper. She, at the age of 90, I think 98 or 99, flew to Phoenix and had already shipped out the loom that her grandmother Wolf had taught her to use.
Yeah.
A weaving loom, right?
Weaving loom. She went out to Phoenix and taught her great granddaughter how to use it
At 98?
in 98. And of course, that was the headlines in the newspaper.
Yeah.
Oh, Pioneer Woman hasn't given up. And it was so neat to think about that. That was just one branch of my ancestor.
Yeah.
Now, Beulah was much older than my mother, but her and Beulah were friends. And Beulah liked Ann, liked my mother, Helen. And my mother was easy to get along. She was bright. She graduated in high school just during the Depression. Her older sisters had graduated from college, and my grandfather Boyle graduated from Westlake Minster College, and he played football for the team. So I mean, you know, these people were doers, and
your dad farmed with horses, right? Even
No.
when you were a kid?
my dad farmed with tractors and used horses to pull the tractors out. Now my grandfather Boyle Fulkerson used horses, farmed 600 acres with horses.
Well, your dad still used them. He had you drive them when you were a little kid, right?
Well, yeah, but that was for what he had. He used them as a hired man. He put the seed and stuff in the wagons, and I had them run along the edge of the field, and he'd come up, spin around, clip to them, and they'd come up and bring the grain. He'd fill the boxes and go back across the field, half-mile rows, but he used them as a hired man. Put me in the wagon to mix the. He'd get on his tractor, stand up and wave. Well, I was to add the water and the inoculant to the soybeans.
And the horse it was your school bus too, right?
That's a hard working horse.
Yeah.
Well, when I first went to one room schoolhouse, my dad was sick, and the older boy at the school, we had a teacher that was 22, and probably half the kids were in their 20s.
They're in school?
Yeah, we're going to school. They went when they could. You know, had work and chores to do.
That makes sense, yeah. A lot
You
of
know,
farming to get done.
and of course, they just continue to learn. Well, one advantages of a one-room schoolhouse for me was my goodness, I could sit there and hear all 8 classes. So I could see where the education was going and what was to do. Well, when my dad did get sick in 1950 and die, they put me in a Galt school, which had, I think, maybe, I had 2 kids in my class at Forest Hill, one-room schoolhouse.
But at your one-room schoolhouse, wouldn't the horse take you there? And if it wasn't season, that older boy would tie him up.
Tie him up?
But if your dad needed him, the horse would walk back to the house.
Yes.
By itself?
Yes.
Yeah. That's how well they would train.
Yeah.
Do you remember what kind of horses they were?
Belgium.
Yep, Belgian draft horse.
I mean,
And
he's
how old were you taking a Belgian to school?
6.
And they were very well trained. They would walk up to a fence post so you could get on it.
Yeah. My dad says you get to a corner post, climb up on the fence, jump on the horse.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sounds like that horse would be 3 times your height if you're 6.
Well, he was.
Very wide though.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, I scoot up on his neck
Yeah.
and go and the boys, when you got to school, the boys would take the horses out of the barn and put them in a shed, and we had hay in the barn, so farmers would bring hay periodically for the horses for the kids to drive to school.
Like a shared responsibility, right?
Yeah, right. I had a 3-mile hike on the horse.
Oof.
You know, I mean, it's
Better than walking it, I guess. But
That's cool though.
yeah.
I've been around horses enough to know how well you can train them if they're
yeah.
working horses, but it's cool that if it knew it was season and you didn't tie it up to go back to the farm.
yeah.
That's a really well trained horse.
Well,
Well, a lot of horses, if they're well taken care of, this used to be a bigger issue back in the day, but they would find a way back to their farm if they were sold.
Yeah.
yeah, it's.
What's also, I mean, the horse just being able to not get spooked or anything while
I remember going the first day of school at Forest Hill, and Mom made me a nice lunch. So I went in and what I did at the about 11 o'clock I decided to eat. Well, the teacher told me I couldn't do that. Well, I was hungry.
Yeah.
You know, well, anyway, my dad and I had an understanding after that. But, you know, I have some fond memories of him. One time it was raining, he bought a brand new H Farmall tractor, took it up to the door and spun the tractor around with one wheel brakes showing off. And of course it was a new tractor, the only one in the area. And we went back and at 9 he came and got me. And the roads are all mud. There wasn't any gravel roads in those days, so it was interesting. But
What about the time didn't you get your car stuck?
Well, if it's on
Well,
the roads,
we had my dad and I been to Trenton, and I don't remember what for. We were coming home on the road and we normally come home. It had had a heavy rain and the 39 Chevy got buried to the running boards in the ruts.
Yeah.
So my dad carried me on his shoulders, went back to the house, got the horses, went back, pulled the car home,
How far
Like
did
a
he have to
wagon,
carry
right?
you?
just like a wagon.
Yeah.
How far were you? How far did he carry you?
My dad probably a mile and a half.
Okay, so you're almost home.
Yeah, I was almost home. But those are some things that a one-room school had a lot of advantages.
Yeah.
What was interesting, I had a couple of kids in my class a little slow. And I don't mean that I was that much faster, but they had difficulty.
Yeah.
And I helped them. The older kids would help the younger kids, and everybody worked together in the school to learn.
Yeah.
And that was so neat because you could learn something.
Well, didn't you have a very mean, almost abusive teacher for a little while when you were at the one-room schoolhouse?
No, that
Or
was
was
at
that
that
Galt?
was at Galt. When my dad died, we transferred everything to Galt High School. To Galt School. Galt had about 600, maybe 400 kids in it.
Oh, so that was a lot bigger.
Yeah, it was a city school.
But it was a big area that they covered too, the whole
Yeah,
county.
you know,
That had to be a major change then.
it was. They were trying to consolidate them.
Well, tell us the story about Busby's dad.
Well, this is in high school. Grant was an older child. He was a younger child of an older couple, and their first child died at birth. Well, I'd say his name is O.S. Busby, and his Orange Atwood Busby was his name.
Orange Atwood Busby?
Mm-hmm.
That is a name.
Yeah. Well, he was a Wrigley heir and lived in Chicago. And anyway, come down, bought a farm. And so we were having FHA ball, or FFA ball. And Grant said, if you can come home and help me, I can go to your ball game. So we did that. And Orange took us to the ball game. But what happened to Orange was radio was on, and every kid had to listen to a radio, good Lord. And so we had it on, and he came in, took a belt off of the milkers of a cow and hit Grant up beside the head, and his ear bled for a couple of days.
He was a drunk, kind of, wasn't he?
Had a fifth of whiskey every morning before breakfast.
What about
High school?
the story about his friend's dad?
Friend's dad. Okay, I thought
Yeah.
you were saying like the student.
Oh,
No,
That was terrifying.
no.
Tell him about the kid with the deformed hand.
Well, we had a teacher by the name of Virgie Kuhn in the second grade. I transferred to Galt. Now, you understand that I was taught script writing.
Oh, yeah?
My dad wrote script, my mother wrote script, we all wrote script. So I go to school and she puts on this old line. This is a B. This is an A. You know, that kind of crap.
Like totally different, right?
Yeah, right. It wasn't script at all. So she came out and had me do a lesson for him. Well, I wrote him a script. Got my hands busted with a ruler. She says, "That's not what you do in this class."
Like a strong response.
And
Yeah,
my
for an
response.
8-year-old, that's a little bit rough.
My response, I put my hands on my hips and I said, "My mom writes it, my dad writes it. If you haven't learned yet, it's too bad." So I had to start from the negative. Well, she would pick on certain students. We had a boy by the name of Raymond Duncan. Raymond was deformed with selenified, and he was partial in hand, and he had bowel problems. And the teacher just took in after him all the time. Just, embarrassing the child and so forth. Well, Grant and I were talking about it. Grant went home the next morning.
Well, didn't she make him soil himself in the class? In
Oh
front
yeah,
of
she
everyone?
wouldn't let him go to the bathroom.
Yeah, and then
Teachers cleaned it up.
and then she busted his hands for doing it, even though
Yes.
she made him do it.
Yes.
Not gonna be winning any Teacher of the Year awards.
No. Well, Ann's older brother, Junior, had her and didn't like her either. And anyway, so when we got finished, it was kind of interesting.
Well, Grant told his dad, you were saying,
Yeah.
that had happened.
Yeah. So next morning, Grant was there. He didn't go to the principal. He went to Virgie Coon.
His Busby, the old man.
The old man Busby. And he says, "You ever do that to that kid again, I'll knock the living shit out of you."
In front of the whole class, right?
In front of the whole class.
Grabbed her by her collar.
Oh,
I scared the crap out of her, I'll tell you that. She never had anybody like that.
oh, yeah.
Well, the principal come down, and the principal made some comments that he wasn't authority to do that. And Busby said, "Abuse is abuse, I don't care whose authority it is. If you let it happen, I'll do the same to you." And that was the end of that story, but, oh, it was terrible. I mean, it was humiliating.
Yeah.
It was. And Grant didn't have a lot of friends, but he considered me his friend. Grant was a good kid. His parents are so old they just couldn't hardly function. And I imagine they were in the 60s. Well, they had to be in the late 50s when he was born. So, but one day I got a phone call from him. He said, "I'm headed for New Orleans." And I said, "What are you going to do in New Orleans?" Well, he says, "I got a contract to move, what was it, 30 dozers to clean up the mess in the hurricane."
Oh, yeah.
For Katrina?
Yeah, for Katrina. And he had these permits for 30 or 40 axles. And he sent me a picture of it, and he had, all you could see was flags and trucks and axles. And they hauled stuff into the New Orleans to clean up the mess.
Man,
All private industry.
be good use of it, I'm sure.
I'll pause it.